My parents didn't invite me to Thanksgiving. Mom said, "Your sister is bringing her boyfriend to meet the family. She doesn't want you there. Your blue-collar job would embarrass her." "I understand," I said and hung up. The next day, they showed up at my door furious, and the moment they saw me, my sister's boyfriend said something that changed everything. "Hi. My name is Harper Lane. I'm 29 years old, a full-time auto mechanic in Boulder, Colorado, and the kind of woman people describe as quiet in the beginning but surprisingly steady once they really see me. Not that many people ever bother to look closely. I've spent most of my life under car lifts, inside engine bays, and in the shadows of people who talk louder than me. Some folks pray in church. I pray with my hands wrapped around a torque wrench, listening to the soft click that tells me something has finally tightened the way it should. I like things that make sense: machines, engines, metal that bends only when you apply force in the right direction. People, on the other hand, people rarely make sense. Especially family. For years, I've been the one who knew how to do things, the daughter who fixed leaks, patched drywall, and checked the tire pressure on 3 cars every Thanksgiving morning while Mom basted the turkey. If the refrigerator died, Dad would call. When Camilla scraped her bumper, I was the one who drove across town at midnight to buff it out because she had an event the next morning and couldn't show up with a tragic-looking car. I paid their insurance once when Dad forgot. I covered Camilla's overdue registration fees because Mom claimed she was under too much pressure at work. And every time I quietly helped, they said the same thing: "Harper's the strongest. She'll manage." As if strength meant I didn't need kindness, as if usefulness could replace love. Camilla, my younger sister, by 3 years was everything I wasn't. Polished, effortless, photogenic. A rising PR star in Denver who curated her life like it was a brand partnership: glowing skin, spotless apartment, soft curls, strategically placed coffee cups, inspirational quotes. She collected compliments the way some people collect stamps. Growing up, she was the one who got the new clothes, the front row audience at every school event, the praise that echoed through our house like a scripted commercial. I was the kid who switched out the faulty fuse in the basement at 10 years old because Dad didn't want to call an electrician. "At least you're useful," he said. You'd be surprised how quickly a child learns the difference between being loved and being used. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I had just finished replacing brake pads on a Subaru when my phone buzzed. "Mom," it said on the screen. I wiped my hands on a rag, took a breath, and answered, "Hey Mom. Everything okay?" Her voice was clipped, too formal, like she was calling a bank. "Harper, listen. About Thanksgiving this year." My stomach tightened, though I didn't know why. "Yeah? We're keeping it small," she said. "Camilla is bringing her boyfriend home for the first time. It's a big deal. He works in finance, a very respectable job, and she wants everything to be perfect." I frowned. "Okay, and?" There was a short pause, the kind that tells you the next sentence is going to hurt. "She doesn't want you there." For a second, I thought I misheard her. "What?" "Don't make this difficult," Mom said, sighing sharply. "You know how Camilla is about image. About how things look. She's nervous. It's important to her that nothing makes her boyfriend uncomfortable. And I would make him uncomfortable?" The question came out small, almost childlike. "Harper," she said, lowering her voice. "Your job. All the grease, the uniforms, the hands. Look, honey, a manual labor job isn't something everyone understands." He might not get it. Camilla said it could make things awkward. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed hot metal. "Because of my job," I repeated quietly. "It's just for this year," Mom said. "Don't be dramatic. Camilla wants to impress him. You know how she is." I stood there in the middle of the garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of oil and rubber, but suddenly, it felt like the ground wasn't solid anymore. I'd been excluded from things before: photos, parties, inside jokes, but never a family Thanksgiving. Never something this nakedly cruel. My mind tried to protect me in the only way it knew how. By going numb. "Harper?" Mom pressed. "Say something." I swallowed the bitterness gathering at the back of my throat. "I understand," I said finally. My voice didn't crack, It didn't tremble. It didn't reveal the sharp, slicing ache spreading through my chest. It was flat, almost painfully calm. Good, she replied. I knew you would. You've always been reasonable. Reasonable. Useful. Convenient. I hung up, staring at the dim glow of the shop lights reflecting off the hood of the Subaru. For a long time, I didn't move. The world felt muted, like someone had pressed cotton against my ears. I wasn't angry yet, that would come later. I wasn't sad either. I was suspended in that strange, silent place where hurt becomes too big to name. It was a familiar place, one I'd known since childhood, and the familiarity was what finally snapped something inside me. Because this time, the numbness didn't feel like protection, it felt like clarity. For the first time in my life, I realized that being left out wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Sometimes, being included by people who only want you when you're convenient is far more painful. I wiped my hands, turned off the lights, and locked up the garage. Mom thought she'd spared Camilla embarrassment. She had no idea she'd just freed me. Driving home that evening, the cold Colorado wind pressed against my jacket as if trying to sift through the thoughts swirling inside me. I kept replaying Mom's voice in my head, calm, practical, almost bored, while telling her oldest daughter she wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving because of how she might look. People always talk about the big betrayals in life, but they never mention how often the small ones are the ones that finally split you open. And for me, that phone call cracked something that had been weakening for years. The numbness stayed with me, wrapping around my ribs, but underneath it, something old and familiar began to stir. A memory. No, many memories. Stacked like boxes in an attic I never meant to open again. I grew up in Fort Collins, a place where houses sat far enough apart for privacy, but close enough for neighbors to be curious. Ours was the third house on Cottonwood Lane, the one with the perfectly trimmed hedges Mom insisted on, and the peeling blue paint Dad promised he'd fix, but never did. Camilla glowed in that house. She always did. From the time she was 5, people said she had a face for magazines. Huge brown eyes, dimples, glossy hair that somehow never tangled. At school, she won speech contests and science fairs and most photogenic in the yearbook. At home, her accomplishments lined the mantel, trophies, ribbons, framed certificates. Every time she added something new, Mom would beam and say, "Our Camilla just shines, doesn't she?" Then she'd glance at me with a soft, apologetic smile that wasn't actually apologizing for anything. And Harper. Well, Harper is good with her hands. That was their way of saying I didn't shine, but at least I was useful. I still remember being 9 years old when the chain on my bike snapped. Dad stood in the driveway, scratching his head, annoyed at the inconvenience. I crouched next to it, studying the broken link the way some kids studied puzzles. 15 minutes later, the chain was back on. Dad blinked and grunted. Huh. Least you're good for something. I didn't know whether to feel proud or embarrassed. Something in me decided it didn't matter, as long as I wasn't in the way. A few years later, I fixed a leaky faucet Mom had been complaining about for weeks. I was 12. I still remember kneeling on the bathroom floor with a towel under me, my hands red from cold water. When the drip finally stopped, Mom didn't hug me or thank me. She called into the hallway, "See? Harper's so helpful. I don't know what we'd do without her." But she said it like I was a tool, not a daughter. That pattern never changed. When the lawnmower jammed, I fixed it. When the outlets stopped working, I replaced them. When the cable box died, I took it apart and brought it back to life. The more things I fixed, the more they relied on me. Not because they loved me, but because I was convenient. Camilla, meanwhile, didn't lift a finger. She floated from achievement to achievement, cameras following her like invisible companions. She'd walk into the house holding another medal, and Dad's eyes would light up with the kind of pride I never managed to earn, no matter how many car batteries I replaced or cabinets I repaired. "Look at that," he'd say, clapping her on the back. "Our overachiever." Then he'd turn to me and nod. "Harper, grab the toolbox. The back door's stuck again." Love is easy to spot when it's given freely. But when it comes with conditions, you learn to live on crumbs, grateful for the scraps, even if they never fill you. By the time I finished high school, there was never any discussion about college. Not because I lacked the grades, I was solid, not spectacular, but I worked hard and loved learning. The truth was simpler. Camilla needed the money more. Mom told me gently that some kids are meant for higher education, and Dad added that people like you do better with a trade anyway. They said it like they were protecting me, steering me towards something sensible. So, I took a job sweeping floors at a local auto shop. It was supposed to be temporary. But temporary things become permanent when no one expects anything different from you. Yet, something happened in that garage. Something quiet. Something real. Engines didn't judge me. Machines didn't lie. Metal didn't care whether my hair was photogenic or whether my posture was good for family pictures. In the garage, I became someone. I learned timing belts, brake systems, carburetors, electrical diagnostics. My hands found a rhythm, my mind found clarity, and my heart raw as it was found a place where it didn't have to prove its worth every 5 minutes. I didn't choose this job because it was manual labor. I told myself once while tightening a bolt under a truck. I chose it because it tells the truth. And that truth was mine, even if my family never saw it. Over time, the pain of being overlooked became something I just learned to live with. Like a scar you forget about until someone presses on it. So when Mom uninvited me from Thanksgiving because my work might embarrass Camilla, it didn't surprise me. It hurt God. It hurt in a way that hollowed out my chest, but it wasn't new. What was new was the feeling beneath the hurt. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter. A soft, steady loosening. As if fingers that had gripped me for years were finally slipping away. A surrender, but not the defeated kind. A quiet, unintended liberation. I sat in my truck that night, engine humming softly under my hand, and realized something shocking. I wasn't fighting to stay part of them anymore. I was finally letting myself go. The numbness lasted through the night, but by the next morning it had softened into something else, an ache, yes, but a quiet one, like a bruise that only hurts when you remember how you got it. I sat at my kitchen table, with a mug of coffee going cold in my hands, staring out at the thin frost glazing the backyard. Thanksgiving was a week away. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't part of the plan, not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as an afterthought. And as strange as it sounds, once the pain settled, there was an unexpected clarity underneath it. If they didn't want me at their table, then maybe it was time I stopped waiting for an invitation that never came freely. Maybe it was time to build something of my own. That thought stayed with me the whole drive to the garage. Redwood Garage looked the same as always, big rolling doors, the faint smell of gasoline, the cracked concrete floor, but that morning, it felt different. It felt like possibility. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and flicked on the lights. The emptiness didn't feel lonely. It felt open, blank, ready for whatever I wanted to make of it. And, for the first time in my life, I wanted Thanksgiving to mean something that didn't involve pretending my family loved me the way families are supposed to. I wanted warmth. I wanted realness. I wanted community, the kind you build, not the kind you're born into by accident. The idea came slowly, then all at once. My mind went to Mr. Owens first. He lived 3 houses down from me, a retired postman whose kids lived on the East Coast and hadn't visited in years. Last winter, I found him shoveling snow alone at 5 a.m. because no one else bothered to help. Then I thought of Marissa, the single mom who'd broken down outside my garage last Thanksgiving when her car battery died. I drove her and her daughter home, fixed the battery for free, and she cried into her scarf because she said no one had ever done something kind for her with no strings attached. And then there were the teens at the youth shelter, the ones I taught basic car maintenance to on Saturday mornings. Kids who had been handed far worse families than mine, kids who still showed up, still tried, still looked at me like I was someone steady in a world that kept letting them down. They were all people who deserved a table. People who deserved warmth. People who deserved to be remembered on a holiday built around the idea of gratitude. And maybe, in some strange way, I needed them too. Once I decided, my body moved on instinct. I drove to the store, pushing a cart piled high with turkey, potatoes, stuffing mix, cranberries, pies, trays, foil, and paper plates decorated with tiny orange pumpkins. I picked up strings of warm bulb lights, a plaid tablecloth, cinnamon-scented candles, disposable heaters, and a big folding table. I bought more than I needed and didn't feel the slightest bit guilty. Some things are worth the cost. Back at the garage, I swept the concrete floor, rolled the tool chests against the walls, and wiped down the long workbench until it gleamed. I strung lights across the rafters, watching the warm glow spill over the room until the garage looked less like a place for oil changes and more like a strange, makeshift holiday cabin. The tablecloth softened the metal table. The heaters hummed gently in the corners. And then I set the food on the counter, seasoning the turkey, slicing apples, prepping the stuffing. Music echoed from my small Bluetooth speaker, soft guitar, warm voices, nothing dramatic. The kind of music that fills silence without demanding anything from it. Somewhere between peeling potatoes and basting the turkey, it hit me. This was the first Thanksgiving I'd ever prepared for myself. Not for my family. Not to impress anyone. Not because someone needed me to fix something. But because I wanted to. And that thought, that tiny spark of ownership, warmed me more than the heaters ever could. When the day finally came, the sky was pale blue and sharp with cold. I opened the garage door to let in light, then waited. Mr. Owens arrived first, holding a small container of cookies he'd bought from the store. "I wasn't sure what to bring," he said, almost apologetic. "I haven't been to a Thanksgiving dinner in a while." "You're perfect," I told him, and meant it. Then came Marissa, carrying her daughter on her hip, both bundled in matching scarves. The girl's eyes lit up at the sight of the lights overhead. "This place looks magical," she whispered, and my throat tightened. One by one, the teens arrived, awkward, unsure, but smiling. They sat at the long table, passing mashed potatoes and laughing in that unguarded way only young people can. Someone plugged in their phone and put on music that was much too loud but made everyone grin. Someone else asked about the Mustang I'd restored. Someone else helped carve the turkey. It didn't matter who they were or where they came from. For a few hours, we were just people sharing warmth in a garage lit by string lights and hope. And as I watched them, something shifted quietly inside me. I didn't feel forgotten. I didn't feel excluded. I didn't feel lesser. I felt full, present, whole. For the first time in my entire life, Thanksgiving wasn't about waiting for a seat at my family's table. It was about building my own and realizing it was exactly where I belonged. And as the laughter rose and the lights glowed against the garage walls, I understood one simple truth: meaning doesn't come from the people who refuse to see you. It comes from the people you choose. And this year, I finally chose myself. The morning after the Thanksgiving dinner in my garage, I woke up with a faint smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey still lingering on my clothes. My back ached from standing all day, but it was a good ache, the kind that comes from doing something that feeds more than just a table. I had barely pulled my hair into a messy bun when the doorbell exploded through my house like someone was punching it instead of pressing it. It was 8 in the morning. Too early for deliveries. Too early for anyone polite. I froze for half a second, a prickle running down my spine. Only one kind of person rings a doorbell like that: family who think they own entry into your life. When I opened the door, all the warmth from the night before evaporated. Standing on my porch were my parents, Camilla, and a man I had never seen before. They weren't just standing, they were storming in place, vibrating with indignation like they had rehearsed their outrage in the car. And judging by the shiny black BMW parked crookedly along the curb, that car belonged to the stranger the boyfriend Camilla was so desperate to impress. Finally, Mom snapped, pushing past me as if my doorway were an inconvenience. "We've been knocking for 5 minutes." They absolutely had not. They had pressed the bell once, like a missile. Dad followed her inside without waiting for permission, shaking his head dramatically. "This is ridiculous, Harper. Absolutely ridiculous." Camilla strutted in after them, arms crossed. Eyes rolling so hard I thought she might tip over. The man, tall, neat hair, expensive coat, lingered behind, looking uncomfortable. He clearly wasn't used to barging into people's houses uninvited. I closed the door quietly, letting their chaos fill my living room without saying a word. Mom spun toward me, pointing a polished finger like she was accusing me in court. "Why did you tell Grandma Cheryl you weren't invited to Thanksgiving? What were you thinking? Do you know how that makes us look? Now everyone is calling, asking questions. I blinked. I told her the truth. You didn't have to be dramatic about it. Mom hissed. I simply told you to sit this year out. Camilla needed things to go smoothly. Dad chimed in, voice exasperated. You're always so sensitive, Harper. Always taking things the wrong way. Sensitive. Dramatic. Overreacting. Funny how every time I repeated their words back to them, suddenly they were twisted, but when they said them, they were just being honest. Camilla stood in the corner with her arms folded, her lips pursed in disgust. She shot me a glare sharp enough to cut metal. It's literally unbelievable that you would make this about you, she said. Do you know how stressful it is to introduce someone to your family, and you had to go crying to Grandma about not being invited? I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but before I could respond, the boyfriend, the only person who had stayed silent, finally stepped closer, studying me with a curious tilt of his head. Wait, he said suddenly, his voice careful, almost stunned. Hold on. Harper Lane? All three of them turned to look at him, confused. I blinked. Yeah? His eyes widened. As in the Harper Lane? The room froze in place. Mom narrowed her eyes. Dad frowned. Camilla looked annoyed that anyone was interrupting her performance. I didn't know what to say, so I just repeated, yeah? The man took a breath as if trying to confirm he wasn't imagining it. You're the one who restored that 1971 Mustang over at Redwood Garage, right? I didn't move for a moment. Then I nodded slowly. His whole face lit up. Oh my God, I knew it. That was your work? That restoration went viral in the car forums, everyone was talking about it. The detailing alone was insane. Your welding, your electrical rewiring. I mean, seriously, that car was showroom level. The house fell silent. Completely, perfectly silent. Ethan, he had to be Ethan. The boyfriend Camilla worshipped looked at me like I was someone worth admiring, someone he'd read about, someone he respected. No one in my family had ever looked at me like that. Camilla's expression twisted instantly, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally, something bitter, sharp and ugly. Wait, what? She sputtered. You're talking about her, Harper? My sister Harper? Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her tone. Yeah, she's kind of a name in the classic restoration scene. People follow her work. He turned back to me. I didn't know you lived around here. Your craftsmanship is seriously impressive. And Frest Minsterch and D lock and creases. My parents stared at him like he had split into two people. Mom forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, come on. She just fixes cars. Ethan shook his head firmly. No. Not like this. What she did with that Mustang, that's art. The tension in the room shifted sharply. For years, they had treated my work as something embarrassing, something that made me less, something Camilla had to apologize for in social situations. Now here was the man she desperately wanted to impress praising me, admiring me, recognizing what they never cared to see. Camilla's cheeks went red with humiliation. Her jaw clenched as if trying to hold her face together. And, for the first time in my life, I watched her feel something I had felt for years, the sting of being overshadowed. Except I wasn't even trying. I hadn't said a single word. I didn't need to. Ethan had said it all for me. For a moment, no one spoke. The air in my living room seemed to thicken, heavy with the kind of silence that exposes every insecurity, every unspoken truth. My parents looked at Ethan as if he had just insulted them, then at me as if I had kept some outrageous secret from them, as if my accomplishments were an act of betrayal. Ethan, meanwhile, was still studying me with genuine admiration, his eyes warm in a way I wasn't used to receiving in my own home. I read about that Mustang on 3 different forums, he said, the excitement in his voice growing. Someone posted a breakdown of the restoration. People were arguing in the comments about whether it was done by a pro shop or a specialist. No one believed it came out of a small garage. His gaze softened slightly. But now I see it. It's the craftsmanship. It's you. You're the one everyone was talking about. Camilla's mouth fell open. Her perfect PR-trained smile struggled to stay intact, twitching slightly at the corners. It was the first time I'd ever seen her unsure of her place in a room, and it startled her. She tried to laugh it off, tossing her hair like she always did when she wanted attention redirected to her. Babe, seriously? It's just fixing cars. Anyone can change a tire or whatever. Ethan blinked, genuinely confused. Changing a tire? Camilla. She rebuilt an entire engine block. She restored a car that had been sitting rusted out behind a barn for 20 years. Do you understand how much precision that takes? Camilla's face flushed a deeper red, her nostrils flaring with indignation. I didn't say it wasn't good, she muttered. I'm just saying it's not special. Mom jumped in, eager to re-establish the hierarchy she had spent 3 decades constructing. Exactly, she said sharply. People fix cars all the time. It's not like she's some doctor or lawyer. It's a trade. A messy one. Anyone can learn it. Ethan's expression shifted, the friendliness fading from his features as he looked at her with a level of disbelief he didn't bother to hide. No, he said firmly, his voice dropping into something colder, more certain. Not everyone can do what she does. Not even close. Dad bristled, clearly unused to having someone challenge his authority in his own daughter's home. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan turned toward him, hands tucked calmly into his coat pockets. It means talent is talent, he said. Skill is skill. And, whether you like the field or not doesn't change the fact that your daughter is incredibly good at what she does. People travel across state lines for her work. Influencers talk about her on their channels. Shops reference her projects when training apprentices. He shot me a quick, almost apologetic smile, like he wanted to soften the blow for my family but couldn't lie to protect their pride. You should be proud of her. I would be. The room trembled with tension. I could see the moment the truth landed heavy, unwelcome, undeniable. My family, who had spent my entire life polishing Camilla while wiping their hands on me like a rag, suddenly found themselves standing in front of a mirror they couldn't control, and they hated what they saw. Camilla's eyes flickered with panic. Her reputation, her image, the shiny pedestal she lived on. Ethan had lifted a hammer without even realizing he was holding one. I don't understand why this matters, she snapped, her voice cracking slightly. It's not like she's... She stopped before saying something she couldn't take back. But she had already said enough. Already revealed enough. Ethan looked at her the way someone looks at a stranger they thought they knew. Why are you talking about her like that? He asked quietly. She's your sister. Camilla's jaw tightened. And I'm telling you she's not. She's not what people think she is. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And what do you think she is? Camilla flailed for an answer, her voice pitching up in frustration. A mechanic. Someone who works with grease and engines and, Ethan pressed. She faltered. And it's not impressive, she whispered at last. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Ethan turned back to me, his voice soft but strong. For what it's worth, he said, your work is some of the best I've seen. I mean that. And something in his tone, the absence of condescension, the genuine respect, hit me harder than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because it was the first time anyone had offered it without asking for anything in return. My family noticed that too. They could see the shift. They could see that someone finally saw me, not the version they crafted, not the role they shoved me into, but me. And the more they realized it, the more panicked they became. Mom's lips tightened into a thin line. Dad's brows furrowed so deeply they nearly touched. Camilla looked like she wanted to claw the air, their perfect narrative. Camilla, the golden child, me, the shadow, was cracking. And the cracks were widening fast. This is ridiculous, Mom hissed. Ethan, you're making too big a deal out of this. It's just cars. Ethan straightened, his voice calm and definitive. No. It's craftsmanship. It's mastery. And anyone who can't see that is choosing not to. My parents flinched like he had slapped them. Camilla looked physically ill. And I, quiet, oil-stained, overlooked my whole life, stood there, feeling an unfamiliar but unmistakable warmth rise slowly in my chest. Respect. Not demanded, not begged for, just given. I didn't brag. I didn't glow. I didn't throw their years of insults back at them. I simply stood still and let the truth speak for itself. And somehow, that made them even angrier. Because nothing threatens people who build their worth on appearances more than someone who builds their worth on substance. For a moment after Ethan's praise hung in the air, the room balanced on an uneasy edge, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. My parents looked stunned, Camilla looked humiliated, and Ethan looked confused by the emotional minefield he'd accidentally stepped into. But it didn't take long for the true purpose of their visit to claw its way back to the surface. It started with Mom clearing her throat and exaggerated, theatrical little sound she always made before delivering unpleasant news wrapped in false sweetness. "Well," she said sharply, regaining her composure. "Now that this misunderstanding is out of the way, we can get to why we actually came." She clasped her hands together as if she were about to offer a prayer. "We need your help, Harper." Of course they did. It was always the same story dressed in different excuses. Dad stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he wanted to seem put upon rather than irresponsible. "The roof's leaking again," he said. "It's dripping right over the dining room table. You should have seen the mess after the last storm." Mom cut in, her voice rising. "And we need it fixed before Christmas dinner. We're hosting this year, and I will not have water stains in front of the entire family." Dad nodded firmly, as if agreeing with his own statement. "You'll have to come by and get it sorted. Maybe today." They didn't ask. They instructed. Like always. And then Camilla stepped forward, flipping her hair back with a huff. "Also," she said, "I need $3,000. Ethan blinked in surprise. "For what?" She didn't even look at him. "Christmas decor. My theme this year is winter luxe, and all the good stuff sells out early. Harper usually helps with this." I turned to her slowly. $3,000? For decorations? She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. That barely covers the centerpieces." Ethan's jaw tightened. It was the first time I'd seen him look less than impressed with her. But Camilla didn't notice. She was too busy bulldozing forward. "And before you start," she added, "I'm behind on my credit card again because Mom and Dad asked me to cover some things. So, if you could pay the minimums for the next 2 months until I catch up." She gestured vaguely, as if I were a living ATM with engine oil under my nails. "You know, family stuff." The three of them stared at me expectant, entitled, utterly convinced that of course I would say yes. Because I always said yes. Because, in their eyes, that was my role. Fixer, helper. The one who manages. The one who sacrifices. The one who doesn't complain. The useful daughter. But something had shifted in me since the phone call. Since the garage Thanksgiving. Since Ethan looked at my work with respect rather than disgust. And now, standing in my own living room, surrounded by people who only came when they needed something, I felt the part of me that used to fold so easily refused to bend. "No," I said. The word came out steady. Quiet. But it landed like a crack of thunder. Mom blinked, stunned. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not fixing the roof. I'm not paying for Christmas decorations, and I'm not covering Camilla's credit card debt. Not this time." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was sharp, slicing through the room like a blade. Dad's face twisted first, red and furious. "Are you kidding me?" he barked. "After everything we've done for you, everything they'd done for me." I almost laughed, but Mom beat him to it, her voice rising into a shrill, angry pitch. "Family helps family," she shouted, as if invoking a sacred law. "You're being unbelievably selfish." Dad jabbed a finger toward me. "You always think you're better than us. Walking around with your smug little face. Acting like you're above the family." Camilla jumped in instantly, desperate to regain Ethan's sympathy. "See?" She snapped at him. "This is exactly what I told you. She loves playing the victim. She never helps unless she wants to feel superior." Ethan stared at her, horrified. "Camilla, she just said she's helped you what? For years? Are you even listening to yourself?" But Camilla didn't care. Neither did my parents. They didn't come to negotiate. They came to collect, and I was done being collected. I walked to the front door, pulled it open, and stepped aside. "You all need to leave," I said. Mom looked like she'd been slapped. "Excuse me? Leave?" I repeated, still calm. "I'm not doing this anymore." Dad slammed his palm against the wall. "You ungrateful." "Get out," I said. Something in my voice must have changed then, because all three of them flinched. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't breaking. I wasn't even angry in a dramatic, fiery way. I was done, and they felt it. They stumbled outside, still shouting, still pointing fingers, still insisting that I owed them something. Mom shrieked from the porch. "We raised you. We fed you. This is how you repay us?" Dad yelled. "You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back when you realize no one wants you." Camilla screamed. "Ethan, let's go. Don't even talk to her." But Ethan didn't move. He stood on the walkway, his eyes locked on me, bewildered by the storm unfolding around him. My parents kept going, volume rising, accusations flying, outrage echoing across the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Dogs barked. The cold air bit at my skin. And still, I stayed calm. I stepped inside, closed the door gently, and the moment the latch clicked, the shouting outside dulled into a distant, pathetic noise. A noise I no longer belonged to. A noise that could no longer reach me. And, for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt with them: power. When the shouting finally faded into the cold morning air, I stood alone in my living room, staring at the closed door and feeling an unexpected stillness settle over me. Not guilt, not fear. Not the old, familiar impulse to run after them and apologize for a boundary I had every right to set. Just stillness. As if someone had turned down the volume on a lifetime of noise. I walked back into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. My hands shook not from doubt, but from release. For 29 years, I had been conditioned to believe my family had power over me. That their approval was a currency I had to earn. That my worth was measured by how quickly I solved their problems. And now, with one quiet word, no, that entire structure had collapsed. But what they didn't know, what they had never cared to know, was that the version of me they kept in their heads was years out of date. They still pictured the girl who left high school and swept floors in a dusty garage. They never bothered to learn what happened after. They never saw the nights I stayed late studying wiring diagrams. The mornings I arrived before sunrise to practice welding until my hands blistered. The certifications I earned. The clients I won over. The vehicles I restored from rusted skeletons into living history. They never asked why people from other states drove hours to bring their cars to me. They never wondered how I paid my bills, or how I managed repairs, or why my garage grew busier every year. Because, in their minds, someone like me, someone who worked with oil under her nails, could only climb so high. They saw my ceiling. They decided it for me. And then they never checked again. The truth was simple. 2 years ago, I bought Redwood Garage from the owner when he retired. Not a lease. A purchase. My name was on the deed. I had saved for years-long nights. Double shifts, side projects, classic car restoration commissions, until I finally had enough to make the offer. He accepted, told me he'd never seen anyone with hands as smart as mine, handed me the keys, and hugged me like a daughter. I expanded the business slowly at first. A lift upgrade, better tools, custom equipment for classic car restorations. And then something unexpected happened: recognition. Photos of my Mustang rebuild got reposted by a car influencer with 2 million followers. Overnight, my inbox filled. Owners of old pickups, Mustangs, Chargers, Corvette shells asked if I would take on their projects. Some drove from Wyoming. Others from Utah. One flew in from Texas to see the shop. And that attention brought more attention. Mechanics respected my work. Influencers tagged me. The local off-road racing team reached out asking if I'd help rebuild and maintain their trucks for the upcoming season. I said yes. Now, every Thursday, their vehicles lined up outside the shop, and the team trusted me with machines worth more than my childhood home. Money started to grow, not fast, not flashy, but steady. I built a savings account big enough to cover emergencies. I invested in a mutual fund an accountant friend recommended. I bought better equipment for the garage and put every spare dollar into making sure the business stood on solid ground. And slowly, quietly, I built a life. Not a glamorous life. Not a loud life. But a stable one, a proud one, a good one. The kind of life no one in my family ever imagined I was capable of, because they didn't see me. They saw what they thought I would always be, the mechanic daughter who wasn't presentable, the girl who fixed their broken cabinets but didn't belong in their dinner photos. They thought my job was embarrassing. They thought my life was small. But as I rinsed my cup and set it on the counter, a slow realization rose in my chest, warm and grounding. I wasn't ashamed of my work. Not for a single moment. I loved it. It made sense to me in a way people rarely did. Engines didn't lie. Machines didn't pretend. Cars didn't ask me to be pretty or polished or less than myself. My job wasn't the problem. The problem was that my family was ashamed not of what I did, but of who they believed I was. And that belief had never been based on truth. Ethan's quiet admiration earlier had rattled them because it forced them to confront the reality they had spent years denying. The daughter they dismissed had built something real. Something respected. Something bigger than their narrow expectations. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. My parents were still in the driveway, pacing, gesturing wildly, screaming at each other now that I was no longer available to scream at. Camilla was crying into her hands while Ethan stood several feet away, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the family he was about to marry into unravel like wet tissue. And for the first time, I didn't feel envy or longing. I felt distance. Healthy, necessary distance. The kind that comes when you finally see clearly. I'm not ashamed of my work. I murmured to myself. They're ashamed of me. Saying it didn't hurt. It clarified, it freed. Because their shame didn't belong to me. Not anymore. I stepped away from the window, walked back into the quiet, sunlit kitchen of the home I had paid for with my own hands, and realized something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Pride. December in Colorado has a way of magnifying everything. Cold feels colder, light feels softer, silence feels louder. And that year, the silence from my family was thunderous. Ever since I'd told them no, I hadn't heard a word from them. Not a text, not a call. Not even one of Mom's passive-aggressive Facebook posts indirectly aimed at me. But that didn't mean things were calm. If anything, the calm was just the surface. Underneath, things were unraveling faster than even I imagined. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow falling over Boulder, dusting rooftops and trees in a delicate white. I was at the garage, cleaning up after finishing a rebuild on an off-road truck, when my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. A short text. Hi Harper. I think you'll want to know what's happening at your parents' house. Are you free to talk? I wasn't sure why he'd reach out after the meltdown on my porch. I assumed he'd be distancing himself from the entire family, but something in the message felt urgent. I stepped outside into the cold and called him back. He answered immediately. His voice was tense, incredulous, somewhere between frustration and disbelief. It's bad, he said. Really bad. I leaned against the cold metal siding of the garage, the snow settling on my shoulders as he explained. My parents had spent the entire month insisting they would still host the extended family Christmas dinner. They told everyone it would be perfect. Camilla is taking charge of decorations this year. Mom bragged to anyone who would listen. We want it to be elegant, magazine-worthy. But pride is expensive. And their pride had a price tag they couldn't cover without me. Without the $3,000 Camilla had demanded, she couldn't buy the winter luxe theme she'd planned. Without money for food, they bought the cheapest frozen items they could find. And without anyone fixing the roof, the steady December rain did exactly what December rain does. It found the weakest point and tore it open. According to Ethan, the first family members arrived at 3 p.m. They walked into a house that smelled like burnt frozen ham and wet carpet. The lights flickered. The decorations were a sad attempt: cheap tinsel, mismatched dollar store ornaments, half a strand of garland drooping over the fireplace like it was depressed. And then, just as Mom was bragging that she had pulled it all together beautifully, A large splash of water dropped directly onto the center of the dining table, right onto the tablecloth, followed by another. And another. Within a minute, a full line of rainwater streamed through the ceiling, soaking the plates, the utensils, the centerpiece candles Camilla had bought on clearance. Guests gasped. Someone shouted, "Is that from the roof?" Mom panicked and ran for towels. Dad cursed loudly, dragging a bucket from the garage. Camilla shrieked that her entire theme was ruined. But the worst part, at least for them, came when Aunt Margaret asked casually, "Didn't Harper used to fix things like this?" Silence. Thick, uncomfortable silence. Then Uncle Ray chimed in, "Yeah, where is Harper? She always helps around the house." Cousin Tara added, "Didn't she fix your gutters last year?" Someone else said, "What happened? Why isn't she here?" And that's when it started. The questioning. The realization. The murmurs spreading across the room like wildfire. "Wait, didn't Harper pay your car insurance last year? I thought Harper fixed your furnace. I remember her paying the property tax penalty when it was late. Did you? Were you relying on her for everything?" My family tried desperately to spin it. Mom insisted I had abandoned them for no reason. Dad claimed I was emotionally unstable. Camilla, already unraveling, snapped. "We told her not to come this year, and she made it into a big deal." That, apparently, did not help. Uncle Ray raised his eyebrows. "You told her not to come?" Aunt Margaret asked sharply. "Why on earth would you do that?" Another relative said. "So you uninvited her, but she's the one who's wrong?" Someone else whispered loudly enough for the room to hear, "I always knew they took advantage of that girl." And in that moment, at the center of their perfect holiday collapsing, they lost the one thing they valued more than family: image. Ethan said the conversation grew louder, more heated. People turned on them. Some left. Others stayed only to demand explanations. And the water continued dripping rhythmic, relentless onto the ruined table. Their Christmas had drowned in its own roof. "They blamed you," Ethan said softly through the phone. "For everything." I let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh but wasn't sadness either. "I know," I said. "They always do." He hesitated before speaking again. "But everyone else saw it, really saw it. They realized what you handled for them, how much you carried." He exhaled shakily, like he still couldn't believe what he'd witnessed. "Your family didn't just lean on you. They depended on you like you were a structural beam, and they never appreciated it." I could hear people shouting faintly in the background, then footsteps, then a door closing. And finally, Ethan's voice, quieter now. "I needed to step outside," he said. "It feels wrong being part of this." There was a pause. The kind that carried meaning. "I also wanted to say, you handled everything at your house with so much grace. More than they deserved." My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something like gratitude. "Thank you," I said. He inhaled a sharp breath. "I'm heading out, I can't stay here." Another pause. Softer this time. "Merry Christmas, Harper." "Merry Christmas, Ethan." As I lowered my phone, I didn't need to see Camilla's reaction to know what had happened. She would have heard him walking out. She would have heard the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to me. And she would have understood, maybe for the first time, that some losses aren't accidental. Some losses are earned. Snow fell quietly around me, settling on the gravel outside the garage, and I felt something warm unfold in my chest. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just peace. The kind that comes when the truth finally has room to breathe. By the time Christmas evening settled over Boulder, the world outside had gone quiet again, snow muffling every sound, the soft yellow glow of streetlights reflecting off drifts that looked almost untouched. But inside Redwood Garage, warmth spilled through every corner. Not just from the portable heaters humming along the walls, but from laughter, genuine, unpolished laughter, the kind that fills a space without asking permission. I had invited the same people who'd come for Thanksgiving: Mr. Owens with his slow, careful steps and his endless stories about delivering holiday mail through blizzards. Marissa and her daughter, both wrapped in the matching scarves I bought them last week. And the teens from the youth shelter, who showed up carrying paper cups of hot chocolate they'd pooled their money to buy. We ate simple food: pot roast I'd made in a slow cooker, mashed potatoes, rolls from the bakery down the street. Someone put on a playlist of old Christmas songs. Someone else started telling jokes. There was no pressure for perfection. No performance. No rules. Nobody cared how the table was set or whether the meal was elegant. Nobody needed me to be anything other than myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in on other people's joy. I was part of it. A warm knot formed in my chest as I watched Mr. Owens wipe his glasses, laughing at a joke one of the teens made. Marissa leaned her head against my shoulder, murmuring, "Thank you for remembering us." Her daughter tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "I like Christmas better here." I swallowed hard. I didn't cry. Not yet. But the feeling swelled inside me, the realization that I had built something real, something human, something safe. Suddenly, the garage didn't feel like a workplace anymore. It felt like a home mine, and yet more than mine. A place where I was wanted. A place where people came because they chose to, not because they needed something fixed. I stepped outside for a moment to breathe in the cold night air, letting the snowflakes melt against my cheeks. The sharpness of winter felt refreshing after the heavy stories Ethan had told me earlier about the disaster unfolding at my parents' house. Their Christmas had collapsed under the weight of their own choices. Mine, though it was rising. I closed my eyes, absorbing the stillness. And then I heard footsteps crunching across the snow. Slow, hesitant, familiar. I opened my eyes to see Ethan walking toward me, a bakery box in his hands, his breath visible in the cold night air. He looked almost out of place in the dim glow outside the garage dark coat, dusting of snow on his hair, a soft, tired expression that told me he'd been thinking too much. "Hey," he said quietly. "I know it's unexpected, but I brought dessert." He lifted the box. Cinnamon apple cake. My mom's recipe. I blinked at him, surprised. "You're supposed to be at my parents' house." He let out a dry laugh. I was. For about an hour. Long enough to watch a roof leak ruin an entire dining table and 3 different relatives accuse your mom of playing favorites. He shook his head. I couldn't stay. I leaned against the garage doorway, letting the warmth from inside brush my back. "So, you came here?" He nodded. "Yeah, I did." For a second, neither of us spoke. Snow fell gently around us, landing on his eyelashes. The glow from the string lights inside the garage cast a soft halo across the snow behind him. He looked at me like he was searching for the right words. Then he found them. "This," he said, tilting his head toward the laughter, spilling from inside, "is what a real Christmas looks like." My throat tightened. "Ethan, no," he cut in gently. "Let me say this." He stepped closer, his breath mingling with mine in the cold night. "I'm sorry. For everything my family, well, Camilla's family put you through today." I shook my head, but he raised a hand. "Harper, they treated you like an object. Like a resource. Like a tool they owned. And then they blamed you when their house fell apart without you holding it together." He exhaled, the sound heavy with sincerity. "You deserved better than that. A lot better." The words sank into me slowly, like warm water into frozen soil. No one had ever stood between me and my family like that. No one had observed the dysfunction and said, out loud, that it wasn't my fault. He wasn't finished. "And I need to say something else." His voice softened. "Camilla. She isn't who I thought she was." There it was. The admission. Gentle but honest. "I've never seen someone so threatened by kindness," he continued. "Or so determined to tear someone down just to feel taller." He paused, eyes steady on mine. "But you? The way you handled everything today, the way you stayed calm, the way you held your ground. Harper, that's strength. Real strength." Something deep inside me cracked, then not painfully, but tenderly, like a thaw. I opened my mouth to respond, but I couldn't. My vision blurred. My chest squeezed. And before I could stop myself after years of holding everything in, I burst into tears. Not sharp, painful sobs. Not the kind born from hurt or humiliation. These were soft tears, warm and quiet, as if my body was finally letting go of a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. Ethan didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He stepped forward and wrapped one arm around me, holding me close in the falling snow. Not possessively, not romantically, just humanly. "You're okay," he murmured. "You're safe." I cried harder, not because I was broken, but because I wasn't. Because someone finally saw me. Because I finally saw myself. When I pulled back, wiping my eyes, he handed me the cake box. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I smiled, small, shaky, but real. "Yeah," I whispered. "You can." Together, we stepped back into the garage, into warmth, into laughter, into the kind of Christmas I never knew I deserved. And, for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt on Christmas Day. Home. The warmth of the garage wrapped around me long after Ethan and I stepped back inside. The laughter, the soft clinking of plates, the glow from the string lights, everything felt fragile in the most beautiful way, like a moment I could hold in my hands. But peace, especially the kind you build for yourself, has a way of provoking those who benefit from your chaos. I should have known it wouldn't last long. It happened fast, so fast that I barely had time to register the shift in the air. One moment, Marissa's daughter was tugging my sleeve, showing me the Christmas cookie she decorated with too many sprinkles. The next, the garage door rattled violently as if someone were trying to rip it off the rails. Before I could move, the doors swung open. The cold stormed in first. Then my parents. Then Camilla. Their faces were contorted rage, humiliation, desperation, all twisted into something almost unrecognizable. The noise inside the garage died instantly. The teens froze. "Mr. Owens set down his cup. Ethan straightened beside me. And my mother, the woman who once scolded me for raising my voice at age 7, screamed loud enough to shake the rafters. "Ungrateful," the words tore through the room. "How dare you embarrass us? How dare you ruin our Christmas? You think you're better than this family?" My father jabbed a finger toward my chest, his face red and trembling. "You owe this family. Everything you have is because we raised you. And this," he gestured wildly around the garage. "This circus is how you repay us?" Camilla pushed forward, hair disheveled, mascara running. Her voice cracking like glass. "You made Ethan leave. You humiliated me. You've always wanted what's mine, and now you're trying to steal my boyfriend too? Are you proud of yourself?" Gasps rippled through the garage, not dramatic ones. Just quiet. Shocked breaths from people who knew the truth and didn't recognize the people standing at the door. My parents kept shouting over each other, their words tripping on anger. "You make us lose face," Mom shrieked. "Everybody thinks we're leeching off you. You made us look pathetic." Dad slammed his hand against the metal table. "You think your little car hobby makes you important? Let me tell you something." "Stop," I said. Not loud, not fierce. Just steady. And the room fell silent, as if someone had pressed a mute button. I stood in the middle of the garage, surrounded by people who came because they chose me and confronted by people who came because they never learned to respect me. The contrast was blinding. "I don't owe you," I said quietly. My mother's eyes bulged. "What did you just say?" I said. I repeated. "I don't owe you." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their anger. I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I wasn't trying to make myself smaller. I was simply done. Every roof I fixed, I continued. Every bill I paid. Every emergency I handled. Every holiday I saved. I did all of that because I cared. But you never cared about me. You cared about what I could do for you. Dad scoffed. "We're your parents." "Exactly," I said. "And the day you only loved me when I was useful was the day I stopped being your daughter." They stared at me, stunned. Speechless for once. It felt like oxygen finally reached a part of my lungs that had been collapsed for years. I reached behind the workbench, pulled out a brown envelope I had prepared weeks earlier, long before I admitted to myself why. I held it out to them. "Here," I said. Dad snatched it and tore it open. Papers fluttered into his hands, neatly printed lists of every expense I had ever paid for them. Insurance, repairs, fees, interest, credit card minimums, grocery runs, gas money, emergency fixes. Thousands of dollars. Years of my life. At the very bottom was a simple line of text. This is everything I ever gave you. I will not give another cent. Do not come to my home or my workplace again. Mom looked up, her face white. You wrote this down? Like some kind of contract? No, I said. Like closure. Camilla lunged toward Ethan as if trying to pull the attention back to her. See? See what she's like? Manipulative. Calculated. That's what I've been telling you. She wants you to see her as the victim so you'll fall for her. Ethan stepped away from her so sharply, she stumbled. His voice, when he spoke, was low but devastating. Harper isn't manipulating anyone, he said. She respects people. She takes accountability. She doesn't use others to hold up her image. He looked directly at Camilla. You do. Camilla froze, her lips trembling. Ethan, I didn't leave because of Harper, he said quietly. I left because I finally saw who your family really is. And who you really are. The sentence hit her like a physical blow. A small, broken sound escaped her throat. Mom reached for her, but Camilla shoved her away, eyes wild with disbelief. I didn't move. I didn't try to comfort her. I didn't apologize. I simply stepped back, letting the truth settle. My parents stood there, three silhouettes in the cold doorway, covered in snow and pride and denial, while inside the garage, warmth pulsed around me like a heartbeat. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was just final. Please leave, I said. And don't come back. Mom trembled with fury. Dad looked like he wanted to punch a wall. Camilla began to cry loud, sharp sobs that sounded more like outrage than pain. But Ethan's words sliced through her, wailing one last time. Harper didn't steal anything from you, he said. You lost me because you never learned to value what matters. And when I finally turned away, letting the door close behind me, Camilla's scream echoed into the falling snow, shrill, fractured, and powerless. Behind that closed door was everything I was walking away from. And in front of me finally was everything I was choosing instead: peace, boundaries, self-respect. Freedom. 1 year later, the world looked different, not because it had changed, but because I finally had. Winter returned to Colorado the way it always does, brushing the mountains with white and tucking the land into a quiet stillness. But inside me, nothing felt cold anymore. The wounds that once throbbed like exposed nerves had faded into soft, painless scars, reminders of a version of myself I no longer needed to be. I had made good on my promise to walk away. After the chaos of last Christmas, after the screaming and the slammed doors and the accusations hurled like stones, I didn't hear from my parents for nearly 2 months. When they finally tried calling, I didn't answer. When they showed up once, just once, banging on my door like the year before, I ignored them until they left. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I had spent 29 years trying to earn a place in a family that never intended to give me one. For the first time, I understood that closure doesn't come from apologies, it comes from distance. Camilla and Ethan didn't last. I heard it in passing from someone at the parts shop. Apparently, the breakup was dramatic, public, loud, filled with the kind of accusations Camilla threw when her world stopped orbiting around her. Ethan, to his credit, stayed silent. I never asked him about it. We kept things simple, respectful. Occasional texts, occasional visits. Not romantic, something steadier, quieter. A friendship built on truth, not obligation. My life itself settled into a rhythm I had only dreamed of before. Redwood Garage flourished. The off-road racing team renewed their contract for another 2 years. A classic car magazine did a feature on my restoration work. My waitlist grew so long I had to hire 2 new mechanics, one of them a 19-year-old I'd met at the youth shelter. I mentored 3 teens consistently now, teaching them not just how to handle tools but how to stand in their own worth, even when no one else saw it. And in early spring, with enough saved and enough peace to imagine a future beyond survival, I bought a cabin near Boulder. A small place tucked against the treeline, with a wraparound porch and a wood stove that crackled like laughter when the flames caught. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, the first space I had ever owned that didn't carry the weight of someone else's expectations. I called it my healing place, though I never said that out loud. I'd wake up with the sun warming my blankets, make coffee, and sit on the porch while deer wandered through the clearing. Sometimes I'd read. Sometimes I'd sketch engine designs. Sometimes I'd just breathe. And on those mornings, I felt something I had never felt in my family's house. Safe, whole, home. My parents tried to pull me back into their orbit occasionally. A birthday card in the mail with no return address. A voicemail from mom that started with, "We need to talk," and ended with, "Call us back immediately." A text from dad asking if I could help with the furnace. I deleted each one. They hadn't changed. But I had. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the fire that burned you. Sometimes, it means building your own warmth somewhere else. When Thanksgiving came around again, I didn't wait for an invitation, not that I expected one. Instead, I prepared the garage like I had the year before. But this time, the crowd was bigger. People brought more dishes. The teens brought friends. Mr. Owens brought his new cane, carved from oak and polished until it gleamed. Marissa's daughter brought a drawing she'd made of Miss Harper's magic garage, complete with string lights and smiling people. There was a moment, near the end of the night, when I stepped outside for fresh air. The sky was full of stars, bright and sharp and countless. Behind me, laughter spilled from the garage, warm and full. And as I listened, something inside me settled into place with a quiet certainty. I wasn't the girl waiting in silence anymore. I wasn't the daughter bending myself into usefulness for scraps of affection. I wasn't the sister shrinking beneath someone else's pedestal. I was Harper Lane. Mechanic. Business owner. Mentor. Woman who built her own table. And I finally understood that walking away from my family wasn't the tragedy they wanted it to be, it was the salvation I needed. I stepped back into the garage, letting the glow of the lights wash over me. Someone handed me a plate. Someone else hugged me. Someone shouted, "Harper, come join us." Their voices rose like a chorus, full of sincerity and something close to love. Not blood, but chosen. In that moment, standing at the heart of the celebration I created, I realized something profound. I had been trying to earn belonging my whole life, never realizing I could build it instead. As the night wound down and the garage slowly emptied, I looked around at the warmth that lingered in the air and whispered to myself the truth I had waited years to understand. They didn't want me for who I was back then. But losing them helped me find myself. Some families break us. But sometimes, leaving is the way to be saved. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel broken. I felt free.